She getting crunk in the club, she working. Then I like to see them females twerking, taking your clothes off, fucking naked. ATL ho, don't disrespect it. So pop your like this, the Yin Yang twins and the BIH, Little John and the East Side boys with me. And we all like to see them ass and titties. How about shout out? I'll repost and promote your channel. Trump Fan Network too. And we all like to see them ass and titties. To the window! To the window! To the wall!
Remember former Trump lawyer Sidney Powell? Well, she's back in the news, and not in a good way.
It's official. Sidney Powell is a massive fraud. That's according to Sidney Powell herself.
Lawyer Sidney Powell has given up the game in a court filing defending Powell from a billion-dollar defamation lawsuit from Dominion Voting Systems.
Well, she is being sued for $1.3 billion over her claims voting systems used in the election were faulty. Now, Sidney Powell says she shouldn't be sued because any reasonable person wouldn't have believed her election fraud claims in the first place.
They are admitting she's a charlatan. The legal defense is based on nobody should have believed the things that she was saying.
Now, right-wing lawyer Sidney Powell is admitting that the big lie was, well, a big lie.
After months of pushing Donald Trump's big lie,
The big lie.
Blatant disinformation campaign.
Back in November, you went on TV many times and you said you had absolute proof that Dominion voting machines were rigged to steal the election from Donald Trump.
Fake news.
I'm just repeating what you said.
No, I meant me. I am fake news.
reasonable people would not accept such statements as fact.
A big lie. Using the old, you weren't supposed to actually believe me defense, previously deployed by Fox News.
Powell responded to the lawsuit by saying that, no reasonable person would conclude that the statements she made about Dominion were truly statements of fact.
She lied bald-faced to 75 million people, many of whom believe her claims, including Donald Trump.
Powell famously promised to release the Kraken in a flurry of lawsuits that would finally prove her claims once and for all.
She was going to reveal some conclusive evidence that she was going to release the Kraken, and it was all going to be made right again, and all the lies would be exposed.
One of the lines in this court filing, her attorneys say no reasonable person would conclude that the statements were truly statements of fact.
I'm going to beat this lawsuit, okay? I come from tough stock. My meemaw was a proud Southern woman from North Carolina, and my peepaw was a wild turkey from... Okay, I'm going to release the Kraken.
It turns out, and this is going to shock you, the Kraken wasn't real after all.
You stupid.
The two things Dominion has to prove here in order to win its lawsuit are, one, the statements were false, and two, that the person who made the false statements knew they were false. Sidney Powell has now essentially come out and admitted both of those things.
She took the stage of the RNC next to the President of the United States' lawyer, so much so that the President believed her. She gaslit millions of people into believing this outright falsehood. And her retraction now is that she's essentially insulting them. She has contempt for them, saying that they were not reasonable people, that they were fools, essentially, for believing what she said.
Well, you know what they say. You can't call it libel if it's all jibble-jabble, and you can't call it slander if it's all...
Well, the media is either lying about Sidney Powell and her representation in court, or they're admitting that they don't understand how defamation defense actually works. One of those two is true. Actually, maybe both of them.
Hey guys, I think she's calling y'all suckers.
Sidney Powell is not stating what the media says she's stating. The media says that Sidney Powell is claiming no one would believe what she's saying is true. That's not at all what she's saying. They're misrepresenting her words here, and that is, of course, par for the course. And that is not what her lawyers are saying, and that's not what she's actually doing. This is a valid legal defense for defamation claims, is to say these are not statements of fact, because that's a legal issue. They must be statements of fact for them to be actionable. She says they're not statements of fact. In the context, these are my opinions, my personal opinions that I'm bringing as part of a court case, and these opinions need to be tested in court. And everybody listening to me, reading these opinions, hearing these opinions, would know that they are untested right now and need to go before the court. And indeed, Sidney Powell and others have made a big deal about how the courts refuse to quote-unquote test their theories and their allegations.
That's right. And from now on, remember, she believes you are such a fool that you're not a reasonable person.
At the end of the day, we do have some things in common. Like, I might say, how could anyone believe this garbage? It turns out she's saying the same thing. She also doesn't understand why anyone would trust her.
Yeah, can I have that excuse too for like literally everything else in my life? What?
Yeah.
Excuse too for like literally everything else in my life? What?
Yeah.
The nuts and bolts mechanics, when you cast your ballot, it's counted. That's generally the way that this goes, and they didn't present any evidence whatsoever that held up in court that proved that this election was stolen from Donald Trump and that Joe Biden was wrongfully elected president.
Well, you know, we have a long history of election fraud in our country. 7 out of 10 Republicans agree with me that there was significant fraud in this election. Not only fraud, the election law was changed by people who had no constitutional right to change it. So a Secretary of State in Pennsylvania or Georgia has no legal right to change the election law, and yet they...
And I get messages all the time, like, why don't you talk about the fraud and all that? And it's just amazing because all of these people at its core, and I said this from the beginning, they're like, aren't you mildly concerned about the extension of Pennsylvania ballots? I'm like, shut up. You don't care about Pennsylvania election law. You never cared about Pennsylvania election law.
It was Republicans who did that anyway.
The GOP
Republicans who did that anyway.
The GOP shut up.
First of all, no court has ever addressed that. No court has ever looked at the facts of fraud. But we had 2 lawyers for the Trump campaign present to us on Wisconsin and Nevada yesterday in our committee. In Nevada, they had 4,000 people who voted illegally. I've not heard one person on the left dispute it or even come to discuss it. 1,500 people who were dead. Tens of thousands of people who did not live at their house. They were voting from a commercial or a vacant lot.
You didn't care at the time. You only cared after you lost the election. And don't pretend that by flirting with this stuff that you're not tacitly endorsing Sidney Powell, Venezuelan Dominion conspiracy theories.
They have punted 60 times, but it's important that the left not get to misconstrue this. None of the court cases were on the facts. They were on standing and procedural technicalities. Nobody has ruled that there wasn't fraud.
And I get messages all the time, like, why don't you talk about the fraud?
We have examples of fraud, and the reason why the fraud is important is we need to go back now and go to every state we can possibly make sure that the election laws are in order, and we need to say secretaries of state cannot change the election law. So I'm going to be working on this in every state that Republicans have a chance of passing a law to make sure that this doesn't happen again. But we shouldn't sweep it under the rug and say, oh, no fraud here, the courts won't hear it. Yes, there was fraud, but yes, also people unconstitutionally changed the law. Secretaries of state do not have any power to change the law, and we need to go back to those states, to Georgia's state legislature, and say, never again will we allow a Secretary of State to do what this one did.